John. We are live.
Sweet.
We are live on the Code It Live channel. Hello, welcome to Eat, Sleep, Code, the official Telerik podcast. I think it is probably not only a slow news day, but a slow day for viewers. We don't have anybody in the chat quite yet.
Oh, that's all right.
So we will take a minute here before we get going just to make sure everything is streaming well. How have you been doing, John?
Good. I think we're finally getting out of the winter uh, doldrums that we're experiencing down here in Australia. So weather's starting to turn the corner a little bit. Unfortunately, we're not able to see the comet that's visible from the northern hemisphere, the Neowise comet. So I was looking up at the night sky last night, and I realized quickly that I'm in the southern hemisphere. That's not going to happen. So I hope you guys can see it over where you are, if you're in the northern hemisphere. It's a great little comet to see right now. It's got a long tail, very visible in the night sky.
What's that one called again? I haven't heard about this.
Neowise, yeah, Neowise is just a reference. It was discovered back in March, and yeah, it's a little visible comet in the night sky. Last time I saw a comet, I think oh gosh, trying to remember the hail. Was it hail bop that I saw? It was back in the 90s. Yeah, I just dated myself. um, I think it was back in the 90s. I'm trying to remember if it was hail bop or something like that. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I remember looking at that thing for like a solid month.
I can never seem to find these things. I've
Hmm.
always got obscured vision or there's a storm, you name it.
Hmm.
I can never get
Yep,
out there in time to find these things. I've caught some of the meteor showers before.
sure.
That happen twice a year. Those are pretty easy because they're so frequent. But these
Yeah,
things never work out for me.
there's the Leonids, which are yearly. I'm not a space junkie by any stretch.
Yes,
But
you
the
are.
Leonids come, no, there's the Leonids that come every year, but yeah, lots of great viewing right now. So
All right, so let's get into some tech news. That's what we do
sure,
every week here on the show is we cover some tech news. Uh, a lot of these, and hello, Curious Drive, welcome to chat. A lot of these links this week are from you, John. I will let you kick it off and tell us a little bit about these things.
yeah,
My news cycles have been just all virus related, so it has
yeah,
been not fun here.
yeah,
Um,
understandable.
let you fire this off. What are we looking at here with this
Yeah,
new
this is a blog
system article?
by the HFT guy entitled "The Most Remarkable Legacy System I Have Ever Seen." It's just a personal account about a person who worked at, I believe, JP Morgan, and at the time was using a piece of code that would allow this person to deploy Python scripts, and provides a nice Venn diagram here of combining JavaScript with CGI based endpoints. CGI is an endpoint sort of reference. So typically, back in the day, you could actually hit an endpoint. For those of you who are too young to know, a CGI endpoint was basically kind of like I guess you could see it like a C program that would have an addressable endpoint via URL. And so CGI programs were ones that were typically written in Perl or they were written in C or whatever. So that Venn diagram is quite funny. But basically, this is a sort of a personal account of how this script remained running for so long. I think it was over 12 years when he was working there. And I thought this would be an interesting sort of a segue for us to talk about any legacy systems that either you or myself have worked on in the past and to share that story. Because I know that one of the things we have to deal with, obviously, in software is legacy. And if there are any anecdotes around that, I think this would be a good catalyst for
I have so many.
that.
I've seen some scary stuff. I've built some scary stuff. I'll admit
Mm,
it.
yep.
I've built some real hodgepodge systems that do really crazy things that we shouldn't be doing. Um, Stuff that collects, data from one source and drops it in another through like batch jobs and timed, what are they, Windows task schedulers,
Sure.
events, and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But surprisingly, a lot of these things actually come out of like commercial finance software, which is
Yeah.
just terrible stuff. And I won't name the companies that were involved, but I mean, these are big, like multi-million dollar software contracts that get sold to the Fortune 500 companies. And I don't know what the deal is, if they're just so gigantic and slow moving that they just can't adapt to the times, or if they are just, you know, the customers are so trenched in that you can't really either change much, or they're not, there's no alternative, so they're not going to leave. But this thing would spit out these horrendous HTML pages that were meant for you to template with. And these templates had VB script, so not JavaScript, but VB script.
Yep.
And this wasn't that long ago.
Hmm.
This is like 2010.
Okay.
So VB script, HTML, inline tables, all the code was in the HTML file. So it wasn't even like an external VBS file. It was just all just one big file. And you're supposed to
Yeah.
edit this thing. And one of the routines that's in it, if you want to call it that, there was no there weren't any proper functions or procedures. It was
Hmm.
all one continuous function. So it not only was a monolithic file in that it had all of the code and all the HTML in it, but it also didn't have any separation of any sort of concerns. And then the variables were named like X and A and B and so on. But I remember one little statement that stuck out, and it was the authentication bits, and it literally was like, if admin equals string admin,
Yeah.
then do more stuff.
Yeah. Those are great.
It's like, no. And this is like something that we're paying like, $100,000, a quarter maintenance contract on. It's like absolutely ridiculous stuff. So I refactored a ton of those pages out into proper, first of all, into separate files, broke them into separate functions, put proper tracing and stuff that would write event logs if something went awry. Um, Took away the fake authentication bits and the whole 9 yards, and kind of rewrote all this stuff.
Huh.
And it was quite the project.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I've got three mini stories. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. It's an oil and gas town, and that means basically when it comes to software, they take the same approach to software that they do running rigs. So the mentality there is basically keep it running, keep the pipeline open. Let's milk this thing for all it's worth. That sort of approach. I'd heard stories that people were running legacy systems in areas like Calgary and other oil and gas cities where they would have to keep the system. The hardware itself would fail. The software itself was decades old. And in order to keep the hardware running, they would purchase parts off of Amazon for these old systems that were, you know, whatever. They were hardware cards or parts of the motherboard that would break, and they would go rather than upgrade the software and get it on modern architecture, they would go out to Amazon and buy old parts for it when they broke. So that was an interesting story to hear.
Yeah, some of those things we had at one of the factories I worked at as well, where these were custom pieces of equipment that had like, I mean, they were off the shelf components at the time.
Right.
I can't remember the brand of computer, but this was like in the Tandy, days,
Sure. Sure.
in the early 70s and 80s, when you had all
Yep.
these different like boutique brand computers that were very custom. But somebody had written software that wrote directly to the registers on that specific piece of hardware,
Okay.
um, because they were trying to milk all the performance they could out of the equipment, which they probably didn't even need to. It wasn't that advanced of stuff, but the software was very heavily dependent on those registers being there. So if you tried to use like a PS2 platform, not PlayStation 2, but like or was it
IBM
which
PS2.
IBM? Yeah,
Yeah.
IBM PS2. If you
How old
try to
are we?
swap it out, right? If you try to throw a Tandy in there, any other standard x86, like 286, 386 platform in there,
Sure.
it would fail because the stuff was written for the specific addresses on this motherboard,
Yep.
like that,
Oh,
that we had.
not
So we
unheard
had to
of.
go like farm like garage sales and all kinds of stuff to find these ancient things and keep them running in
Yeah.
in the late '90s and early 2000s.
Yep. The other story, I have two other stories. One of which I'm involved with. This was sort of like a legacy. I was basically a fresh software developer out of a computer science program. I had gotten my first job. I committed myself to getting a job during summer. I that was a programming job. So most students would go home during the summer break and get jobs. I think a lot of people planted trees. That was a big thing in Canada back in the '90s. Other people would, do landscaping. I did that for a number of years. And then I decided once I'd gone to computer science, I'm going to get a programming job because I really need the experience and I need to cut my teeth on some code. So I got a job at a firm that specialized in multi-platform compiler technologies, which was great. It was like throwing me in the deep end. You couldn't ask for a better position. And one of the tasks that I had been given was this company had specialized a lot of its work in Unix and Linux, and they had all this great code on those platforms, and they wanted to support Windows. So I had been thrown in. I guess they were like, give the student this job of porting our code over to Win32. And so I really didn't have a lot of experience whatsoever. And one of the things I had to do was write a Windows service. It's the equivalent of a Unix daemon, basically. It's a windowless program that typically didn't have any output capabilities whatsoever. So you could write to a log file, but that was a bit tricky because the code was also in C. So C++ wasn't an option. We were writing in ANSI C. And so I was struggling as to figure out how to debug this thing because I was trying my best to. I didn't know enough about log files. I didn't know enough about console output. That wasn't really a thing that Windows services did back in the day. Oh, there you go, the 286.
That's the one.
Yeah. Anyways, long story short, I had resorted to using a System32 call called Beep in order to debug this thing. So I actually put the equivalent of trace points in my code that would beep at different frequencies when the Windows service would kick off. And I thought at the time, I was 20, 21 or something. I thought that's a clever way to do it when I have no means of debugging this sucker.
Yeah.
So that code thankfully does not continue to live. There's not some QA lab where there's this server that's beeping. But it was a workaround until I actually figured out how to write to the console.
You have
So
it
yeah,
doing like
bit
Morse
embarrassing.
code. Like,
Yeah, a bit
dee, dee,
embarrassing.
dee, dee,
Yeah, I
dee.
know, I know, I know. Bit embarrassing for me, but what have you. I tell that story on Twitter all the time. I'm not, I have no shame. This is a nice box, by the way. So the old pizza style box.
Yeah, so this thing, there was a cabinet, a metal cabinet that stood about 10, 12 foot tall. And if you had the keys to it, you'd open it up. And inside running all of the, the bits
Does
was
it have it?
this.
It has a turbo button. That's
Yeah.
awesome. The
So
turbo
it was
button.
a 10X,
Yep.
which I don't know what this is. This says compact, vintage compact, but
Yeah.
it's a 286 platform. And there was a motherboard on here that had specific addresses that this person was using that did not equate to another platform that we could use without having somebody rewrite the code. And nobody knew anything about the source code for this
Sure.
thing. I mean, it was
Yep.
written ages before we saw it, um, and I had the luxury of maintaining this
Wow.
this thing, and we would shop. I'm surprised they found one because I
Yeah.
mean, I guess this was before like eBay and stuff anyway.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
S-
eBay. That's what I meant to say. Not Amazon. eBay is where they would shop for these parts.
so every time this machine would die, we'd
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
go out and
And
find
buy a new one. Yeah.
these 10x things, and like it's not even like a brand that's around anymore. So it was just
Yeah.
god awful.
My
And
my favorite are those I/O shields you see on the front there because it's the equivalent of buying a car, and you know how you get those panels where they're all covered up. And you're like, if I'd spent a little bit more money, there might have been a feature here that I could have used. And so everyone's got those I/O shields on the front of their lap or their PCs, and I'm like, I wonder what they could have put in here. Maybe another drive. Maybe an LED display for turbo mode. I don't know. So yeah. The third story that I want to share was a one that dates back to 1999, or no, sorry, 2001. Excuse me. This was The early days of .NET, and I had written a solution for part of a site, and the site was rather large, used by a number of customers, and I'd written a part of the site that had been contracted out to me, and I felt like I read it well enough. It was written in ASP, and ASP.NET, I think, was just on the corner. And I remember I walked into the company that I wasn't working for the company, but I was contracting and doing contract work for another company. And that other company was saying to me that they actually wrote what did they say? They said they wrote a service that would restart the web server every 5 minutes because they ran out of memory because the code
Jesus.
was written so badly that they were like, screw it, let's just restart the web server. And I'm like, what are you doing to all the sessions? Is anyone buying anything on this thing? They're like, it's fine. They just restarted, whatever. So, yeah,
Yeah,
good stuff.
these were like the bane of my existence. We had these cabinets. It looks like a
Sure.
server rack,
Yep.
but I mean there were between like one and four, maybe six of these together in some cases. They
Yep.
would have all sorts of custom like equipment built inside of them, and it was all for testing like electronics that went into like flight assemblies and
Yeah.
had HUD displays for aircraft and whatnot. And it was like testing motherboards for these different devices, and they had these big test rigs. And like anytime something would go wrong with this test equipment, I'd have to like dig into these archaic like homebrewed things that people put together and try to figure out
Yep.
what went wrong. And generally, with my luck, it was a power supply issue. So we just swap out power supplies and be the hero for the day. But
Perfect.
if it went
Perfect.
beyond that, I mean,
Yeah.
it was a nightmare. Like,
Yeah.
you know, three cabinets full of just breadboard. I forget what they call the twisty wires on those these days.
Twisted
Uh,
pair.
no, it was like a oh shoot, I don't know if they do these anymore.
I think I
Uh,
think uh, I think enough people are like, I don't know what you're talking about, Ed. Like, are you talking about you know are you talking about vacuum tubes now? How old are you, Ed?
we had these things. I can't remember what they're called. They looked like these prototyping breadboards,
Oh
but
yeah,
instead of like being plugs like these, like you like insert things into them,
sure. Yeah, I've
they
used those.
had like it looked like needles sticking out, and
Oh, okay.
you'd take a special tool and it would wrap wire around the pins, and then you would take the wires and build like a bird's nest.
Yeah.
And
Anytime
that's what
anytime you got
those yeah.
yeah, this would always turn into a complete and utter mess whenever using those for sure.
Oh, dude, we had a shop floor full of machines that were filled with these bird nest things.
Sure, sure.
Um, oh man, I'm gonna struggle to remember what that's called. We'll move
Yeah.
on while I think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it,
I
though.
think it's probably best that we don't embarrass ourselves anymore. So, anyways, I thought this was an interesting post, and yeah, just kind of a trip down amnesia lane, as they say.
So, what's with the Unreal? Was it CLR, like Common Language Runtime?
Yeah, that's right. So this is a project done by NX right right here, I believe, right there, excuse me, called Unreal CLR, and this is essentially a set of classes for running, basically providing the .NET Core integration into the Unreal Engine, which is a very popular, very powerful runtime environment for building games. And so the idea here is that you can build out your game logic in C Sharp or other .NET languages, and then utilize the engine through this API that's provided. So it's kind of a nice little hook into the Unreal Engine. Should provide some nice. Oh, there you go. Would you stop?
Whoops, I didn't mean to put it over the top of what we were looking at.
That's fine. That's fine.
Uh,
That's kind of what it
this,
looks like actually when you're using it. I'm kidding, but
come on.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
anyways, if you're looking, go ahead.
this is the visual for the nightmare that
Yes.
was my
Okay.
life for about 5 years. So if you look into like an arcade machine from like the
Sure.
80s,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
kind of what's going on inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think they build stuff like this anymore for the fact that, first of all, much of this stuff is much smaller. Um, you can buy pretty much everything that is on this board
Sure.
integrated into tiny little, what are those things called? Like,
Raspberry Pis.
yeah, Raspberry Pi and all that. So that's kind of superseded all this nonsense.
Yeah.
But essentially, if you opened up like a 1980s arcade machine,
Yep.
like that's pretty much the wiring that's going on inside that thing. That's why it's
Yeah,
hard to keep those
it's
alive.
lots and lots of registers in those machines.
Yeah, but the other
Registers
reason
are
they don't do
those
this
black.
anymore.
Sorry, I just registers are those black brick things that you see. They're kind of like ROMs. They're
Yeah,
those Twix or Kit Kat looking things on the board there. Those are basically they're integrated circuits, and what they are is basically you can burn them with UV light, but basically they're hardwired to do specific functions. And you'd see these massive breadboards with a lot of these on them.
yeah. See, so you've got the little bank up here you can plug
Hmm.
your IC into,
Yep,
and then the legs extend down, and that's where your little wire wrap
perfect.
goes. And then if you look at the detail on the wire wrap, it's you
Yep,
basically you have a little tool you like put your
I
spool of
know,
wire
man.
into,
Total
and it
fire hazard.
looks yeah, it looks like a crocheting needle, and you put it over
Yeah,
the top of this square needle, and you twist it, and it kind of like faux solders this on, and it's
and
I mean it works, um, but they have terrible RF pickup.
yeah,
Like
of course,
it's
it's
just like a
amazing,
million antennas like sitting
dude.
underneath that board.
Dude, do you understand? We landed on the moon with technology that predates this. Do you understand that? Like, do you understand like just how amazing that is that we survived?
Yeah.
Like it's incredible.
Yeah, so I've built some of these things,
Yeah,
little IC,
yeah,
like
that's a capacitor there. So you got a couple of capacitors. Those bands indicate, I believe they indicate
yeah, the
resistance levels.
resistance, yes,
Yep,
some sort of transistor of some kind.
yep,
I've built a 555 timer with discrete
perfect,
components on top of one of these, and I have it somewhere. Or no, sorry, it's not a 555. It's a
dude.
I have
You
a discrete. It looks just like this.
sure?
It's made with discrete components, which means it's like basically like off the shelf like
Yeah,
resistors and
yeah, yeah.
transistors, but it is 1 bit of memory. It is a flip flop, and it's about I'd say it's about half an inch long.
Yep,
And I was talking to somebody one day, and they will remain unnamed because of embarrassment. And I said, there are a million of these in your phone. And they were trying to figure out how
sure.
there could be a million of those because it would fill up like a swimming pool.
Mm.
It's like,
Nope,
yeah, they
not
get a lot
anymore.
smaller. This isn't
Yep, they
this
do.
isn't how big they are anymore.
I was gonna say, this just brings back memories of going to Radio Shack on weekends. Like my dad was like, you have to understand, my dad was like, he's a doctor. He's like, he's science background, blah blah blah. But when it came to computers, it was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I'd beg him to take me to the Radio Shack store. They always had this sort of area for circuitries like this. You could literally walk up, and they had this wall of circuits that you could just buy. And I remember just staring at it. I'm like, I don't know what any of this is, but it fascinates me. And I think I was like 14 at the time. Like this stuff fascinates me. Like, tell me more. So,
I used to do this for a living. It's it's not something I liked that much, so I got into software instead.
uh-huh.
I still have some of the gadgets around here somewhere. I'm digging through debris on my desk. I know I have like some of
This is
these
like
circuits laying around.
this is like going through old repos, in the software world. You're like, oh, I got some old code here. Yeah,
Yeah. Matter
amazing.
of fact, in the background, you could probably make out.
Oh yeah, a little board there. What do you got? That blue thing?
There
Yep.
we go.
There you go. Oh wow,
Here we are. So
that looks a little advanced, dude. That doesn't look old. What is
it's
that? Like
actually
is that Sound Blaster motherboard or something?
no, it's a radio.
Oh, okay,
You're
a
really
ham
good with
radio.
your electronics there, John.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's an AM FM radio.
Most Sound Blaster cards were that big back in the day.
Hey, it's sound related, so you're partially right. It blasts the AM frequencies
Gotcha.
in your ears.
What?
Yeah, that's something I put together.
There you go. Perfect. All right, I think we've bored everyone to death now.
Are we? Yeah, electronics is boring. I'm sorry, it is. That's $20,000 I won't get back.
Sure, sure.
It's
Yep,
worthless degree.
yep. That's
All
right.
right.
So yeah, if you're interested in looking at targeting the Unreal Engine, this is a sort of interface for that. Running .NET Core, so it's called cross-platform. So go check it out.
So you could use the Unreal Engine to build a wire wrap simulator.
Well, I guess the idea here is that typically I know people don't like writing their game logic in languages they don't understand. So like or are comfortable with, I guess. So if you want to stick with C sharp, you can use a feature like you can use a repository like this to interface into the Unreal Engine and implement your game logic there.
So let's see here. There we go. Just trying to find my screen here. Curious Drive was asking how long it's been since I switched from the electronics world to the software world. So long story short, I started dabbling with software and thought that electronics would take me into the software career where I wanted to be. And it just turned out to be a big, boring, and expensive journey into a job that I didn't like.
Fair enough.
So I'd say probably about 2000, I started working back on software stuff through
Nice.
the job that I had with hardware. So I ran an EEPROM programming department
That's
after I did
hot.
the whole
That's
testing
that's really
situation.
sexy EEPROM programming. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
so we were doing EEPROM programming, and then
Did you
like
have
you
to
said,
burn it with the UV light and all that
yeah,
to
yeah.
wipe out?
So
Yeah, yeah.
some of these have they're called UVEs, UVE proms, and you'd have a little thing that you'd put them in,
An
and
oven.
they're
You'd have to bake them.
yeah, yep.
Classic.
Now, not all of them are
Yeah.
um, UV erasable, so you have to find the ones with windows on them. I had the almost exact model on
Oh,
my
dude,
desk.
that's it. That's it right there. You put them in this little oven thing, and then
Yep.
they would basically that would be like the equivalent of zeroing all the memory so that you could write
Yeah.
to it.
So that you had to have the ones with the window
Yep.
first of all, otherwise the UV light can't get in there. And then I also had a job that came shortly after this where I would remove this top layer. This was on Twitter the other day. Somebody was like, "What did you do before programming?" I would remove the top layer of this, okay? Because not all of them have a window. Just the UVEs have
Yeah, yeah,
windows.
yeah,
I'd pop the top. Some of them were called cans. They're all
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
metal, like your Intel processors and stuff in your computer these days are usually metal cans. I'd pop these tops off, and then at a high-powered microscope, I'd look inside and look at the die right here and see if there's any damage and inspect
Fantastic.
these for damage. Because a lot of
Fantastic.
times we'd buy these things and we would end up with like stuff that was secondhand,
Sure.
especially with programmables. What you get is some of them aren't reprogrammable. Some don't have an erase function at all. And what happens is after you program them, you can actually see inside. Oh, went to the wrong link there.
Okay,
Trying to
fine.
zoom back in. You would go inside of this thing and look, and you could actually see there was a little lead that comes out and attaches to the pin. Right, that would be broken if it was programmed incorrectly. Like they
Or
used
even
the
worse,
wrong.
it was your ground pin. Imagine your
Yeah.
ground pin being, and then everything just kind of short circuits. That's perfect.
Well, they'd farm them off of boards that were
Yeah, yeah,
already like broken and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
So some like it'd have damage, like high voltage would hit it or
Oh,
something,
sure.
and
Yeah,
this thing would be busted inside. So we delid them, and then we grab the microscope and look at them, and
fix them.
then send them back to the vendor and say, hey, we're not going to
Yeah.
pay for these. We're going
The,
to get our money back because you
the
sent us
amount of
bogus
the
stuff.
amount of duct tape, the equivalent of duct tape that holds everything together is unbelievable. It's crazy. I'm amazed that anything worked back in our day. But there you go.
Yeah, and
So,
in case you're wondering, like this didn't go into anything important like military aircraft or anything like that. So don't worry, because it totally wasn't going into military aircraft.
yeah, those
Yeah,
stuffs were very custom.
yeah. I hope you're picking up on the sarcasm, but I'll stop there because it gets into some pretty murky waters that I probably shouldn't cross lines into.
All right.
Yeah, but that hopefully that answers your question, Curious Drive. It's been nearly 20 years now. I'm a lot older than I look, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I've done a many things in my years, including have a mouse that has a mind of its own. Where's this going?
Not sure.
Scroll back up here. It did all that by itself.
There
All
you
right,
go.
12 Visual Studio debugging productivity tips.
Yeah,
Where are we at, John?
these are a classic sort of blog post where people just summarize things that you may not have realized you can do with X, Y, or Z. In this case, it's 12 Visual Studio debugging tips. Debugging is, I think, a lost art in some ways. You've got all these, the kids these days, they got all these fancy tools, right? But I think that when things go wrong, it's really important to know how to figure out what's going on. As I said in the last episode of Eat Sleep Code, when you're debugging, you're like a crime scene investigator. You come to the scene of a murder, and what's even worse is you're the one who's responsible, and you've got to trace back the steps of how you got to this point. And
It's
so,
kind of like cleaning the bathroom after toddlers.
That's
It's like
true.
a crime scene investigation that you're
That's
trying to
right. You
figure out
got
what in God's name happened here.
yeah.
Sorry,
You're
go ahead.
walking around. You're walking around looking like Matlock, and you're like, how did he get over here, and what did happen over here?
How did that get on
God,
the wall?
I know.
You follow me. You
So
have two young ones too. You know
I
what I
do.
mean.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I don't even question anymore. I just get angry.
So debugging.
So
We're debugging now.
right. So there's lots of ways in which you can debug code. Visual Studio's gotten really good in terms of providing these facilities in recent years. Back in the day, it didn't have so many debugging capabilities. We had to rely on, printf statements or console.writeline or what have you. Maybe System 32 beep APIs, huh? Right. um, but
Nice callback.
I know these days, there's lots of features to Visual Studio that provide these capabilities. A lot of these are based around, um, you know, capabilities that allow you to skip over or run to cursor, that sort of thing. Those are the general ones. I think some of the more advanced ones are things like trace points. Trace points are really nice. They're like breakpoints, but they allow you to output console statements when they are hit, so they don't necessarily pause execution. One of the greater features that I loved back in the day was when I think Visual Studio had added this, you could actually break on any exception that was thrown either by the CLR or by your runtime code or your user code rather. And so you'd see a lot of breakpoints firing off within the runtime. Sometimes you'd catch breakpoints that, or rather debug statements that had been somehow mysteriously compiled into the runtime itself. So you'd see these sort of stops on like line 2800 foo.cpp, sort of thing. So yeah. So anyways, this is a great article that gives you a rundown of some of those capabilities. I would look at trace points. I would look at IntelliCode or IntelliTrace as other capabilities in Visual Studio. IntelliTrace is a great capability that allows you to basically play back code that's run in execution with Visual Studio to see. It's sort of the equivalent of viewing the murder in that case, but lots of great stuff. And so I thought this would be a great article for people who maybe haven't spent a lot of time debugging to check out.
Yeah, so bearded builder knows me pretty well here,
There you
so he can tell I'm having a good time here, watching you
go.
talk about debugging because
Sure.
bald builder knows I don't do a lot of debugging because I
Your
don't
code
want
runs
bugs
perfectly every time. Right,
every
right.
time,
Yeah.
every time. Yeah.
It
No,
compiles, ship it.
something I wish I knew more about
Hmm.
is the debugging process. I feel like I'm
Sure.
all thumbs when it comes to debugging. Actually, like
Yeah,
I know there's more efficient ways to do it, and like
there are.
your beep example, I'm like the got here debugger, and I put
Yeah.
in like the console write line, even though I
Yep.
know there's just better ways.
Yep.
It's just like you're like it can't be this big of a deal, so you like put in the console log, and then like 5 hours later, you're like, why is this still not working? And you should have just done it a different way with
Sure.
like traces and uh, writing a proper log file and all of those
Sure.
things.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
there's no more excuses anymore. You have no excuse. There are libraries available, and if you really want to dive into this deep, I mean, I would get outside of Visual Studio, maybe run this stuff in CoreDBG or WinDBG. These are utilities that we used back in the day, and people still use very successfully. That allow you to debug programs outside the context of an IDE. So definitely worth knowing. And in some cases, these are actually features that have been around for a long time. Those capabilities, but and if you're on Mac, there's the console app. I'd read something somewhere that people were upset that the console app in Mac, console.app, is hasn't been updated for a while on the Mac. Basically, console.app is just it's kind of like a trace viewer. It allows you to see statements that get executed by programs in a sort of trace state context. So lots of work.
This is one that I used a lot. Run to
Run a
cursor
cursor, sure.
is always the best.
Run here through with a mouse click. Yep, that
Yeah.
one's integrated. What's that one? Set next statement here. Yep.
Yeah.
Whatever. Data breakpoint.
They've
Break
added a
when
lot
value
of stuff.
changes. Yeah.
Visual Studio's got some amazing debugging. That's its real strong suit right now.
Yep.
Visual Studio Code is fast. It's great. It's not on par with this yet. And I don't
There's
think it
a
ever will be.
there's a trace breakpoint there. Those are called. I like to call them trace points. What these are is basically they'll output statements. This is a really powerful feature I never see anyone use. But instead of writing, so in the example there, you can see in the GIF example, they say console.writeLine. You actually don't need to write that. You can actually just do a trace point, and what it will do is it will do the equivalent of what you write in the evaluation. So if you want to output statements to a trace window, you can use a trace breakpoint to do that. You don't have to add additional code to it.
This is
Trace
how I find all
objects.
my task.waits.
That's right. Yep. Track objects
that
are
are
out of scope.
Oh, I didn't
So
know you could do that either.
yeah, so I guess you're just tracking or watching values, object references, and then there's that dollar sign notation. I think they got that from Chrome, if I remember correctly. The dollar sign one
Probably.
notation. Yeah, Chrome DevTools has some great capabilities that I think people are borrowing from each other from. What's this one you're showing now?
Autos.
Oh, right. Sorry,
Values
yeah.
returned by functions.
Okay, yep. Yeah, autos basically. Autos are great.
Reattach
And
to
then
process. This
yeah,
is something I can never get working right.
that's a brave man who does that, in my opinion. Yeah, attached to process is not for the faint of heart. I've never seen anyone use that successfully.
Yes, I agree.
No side effect evaluation in immediate window and the watch window. Actually, you know what? I should correct myself. I have used that myself, attached to process once before. Successfully, yeah, I might add.
Yeah,
And I used it for a Windows service. Sorry.
Visual Studio is the king of debugging, really. I mean, that's its bread and butter right there.
Oh goodness.
Here's our thread that sleeps I was talking
debugging.
about.
Oh goodness. Yeah. If you ever want to see the depths of hell, go do some thread debugging.
Debug source code decompiled from IL
Right.
code.
So this is sort of like the equivalent of I guess
Yeah.
getting the source from what are the source servers that that Microsoft provides.
Dude, this warning message makes me feel really confident
That's
when
right.
I go into the tool.
Oh, that's decompiling. That's what it's doing. It looks like.
Yeah, it's
So it's actually
decompiling the
okay.
IL code.
Decompile IL code. Yeah.
Decompile
That's
IL code to source code that can
yes.
be debugged.
Yeah.
I've had to
Anyways,
decompile something for a legit reason only one time in my life. And
sure.
that was because, other than learning about something, I
Mm-hmm.
decompile .NET stuff all the time just to learn about the underpinnings.
Yeah.
It's actually
Yeah.
like open source. You go look at it, but sometimes easier just to hit decompile on it with
Yeah.
Telerik. Just decompile.
Hey, there you go.
Free tool to plug there. No, but one time I somehow lost the source code to something.
Sure.
And this was actually a production app, and the source code was nowhere to be found on any of the machines it was developed on, and it was not in our central repository, so we had to decompile the app and kind of translate it back to its healthy state.
One time I used a decompiler was, excuse me, I was trying to figure out how XML serialization worked in the .NET framework. This was way back when, and I didn't realize it was actually we were wondering because we had written a service, excuse me, that was highly restricted. We'd locked down all the permissions, so you couldn't do I/O, you couldn't do various other operations. But when we were trying to do XML serialization, it would just bork, like the CLR would just crash, and we couldn't figure out why. Well, it turns out in the early days of XML serialization, it would actually emit temporary files to a well-known location in order to do the XML serialization. So we would decorate in order to do. We were just doing network calls. We're like, why are we getting I/O exceptions here in the runtime? And it turns out that the XML serializer in .NET was actually generating these temporary files during runtime. to
Mm.
do the XML serialization of messages that we had decorated with attributes. We're like, what? So we had to use a decompiler to figure that out. That was a tough one.
Yeah, .NET hasn't always been open source either, so there's
All right.
that too.
Yeah. Announcing the porting assistance for .NET. This is from the AWS guys. Surprisingly, the AWS folks. So basically, people are obviously gravitating towards .NET 5 eventually. If not, they're going to .NET Core 3.1 or 3. And so this is a tool that has been provided by the nice folks at AWS to help you port to your existing applications to new frameworks. And so this is a tool that's been provided that you can run and see if it can help you getting ported over to .NET Core 3.1, 3, 5, who knows. So I just thought it would be interesting to mention, see if people want to take a stab at it, look at it, see if it's
Yeah,
going to work for them.
AWS is a big competitor to Azure, and they have discovered that long ago, actually, that in order to compete with Azure, they need to play very nicely with C Sharp
Right.
and .NET. So
Yep.
they actually have a .NET what do you call it, developer advocacy team.
Yes. Yes.
They do a lot of .NET tooling inside of their platform. They have quite a bit of support for C Sharp and .NET on the AWS platform.
Now, my experience with porting tools has been not great. Generally speaking, when porting, you have nice question there. Has
Mm-hmm.
Azure built any porting assistant like this? I don't
Are
believe
you
there
aware of
is.
anything? I'm not.
I think they're built usually into Visual Studio. So Visual Studio is
Okay.
the team that usually uses. They're the ones tasked with that. But getting back to what I was saying, you generally have three approaches to porting. You can either leave as is, you can integrate and build with new, or you can just blow away, nuke it from orbit, and go from there. Um, I would say that in most cases, it comes down to time and money. It really doesn't come down to technical capabilities. Very, very seldom have I come across a case where um, the issue of porting or not porting comes down to a technical hurdle. It's more often than not just a case of we just don't have the cycles to do it, and that's
Mm-hmm.
totally fair. But my experience with porting tools like the Porting Assistant, not this one, but other tools like it, I've used many porting tools, is that they give you these really long reports. You end up fixing all the problems, and it still doesn't work as well as it should. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is a means to an end. It gets you kind of maybe, I would say, as much as 50% there. But the remaining 50 and greater percent that you have to do is due to the fact that there may be APIs or techniques that are better, or because you're running on a new system or a different system, the stuff, the the assumptions you're making in your code are completely different. It's contextual. You have to understand that you're running on Windows, whatever, next version, and there's an API that does everything that you've done. So you end up deleting a lot of code. Like, so for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you're porting Visual Studio, Visual Basic, or old C Sharp code or what have you, the new language capabilities you end up deleting just reams and reams of code. I remember I worked on a code base one time that we went from VB6 to VB.NET. We took the code base
Oof.
from about 5 or 6 million lines of VB6 code down to 500,000 lines, which was incredible. We had like almost a order of magnitude change in the number of lines of code simply because the .NET framework did so much for us. So, yeah, use these with, they're just tools. They're just means to an end. You don't have to use them, but if you are porting and you think this might help you, this would be a way to do it.
Yeah, Bearded Builder pointed out a good one for porting old apps to new. Mobilize.net
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a advertising partner of ours. We do a lot of stuff with them. They have some tools that can bring your like VB like 6 apps up to like a web standard type of application. It's pretty cool stuff.
As much flack as VB6 gets, they still, to this date, I think, arguably had the best WYSIWYG interface design time experience, in my opinion. VB6,
My
the Visual Basic editor for UI was fantastic. Sorry.
my beef with VB6 and Visual Studio, whatever it was called back then, was you would install the VB6 environment on your computer, and then you would install, say, like the C sharp or say C++ environment on your
Sure.
computer,
Yeah.
and those two things were like oil, water, and rocket fuel.
Yeah.
They would just explode
Yep.
into a big hot burning mess, and
Yep.
then none of the things would work anymore.
Nope.
And then you'd go to I don't I don't know if you could call it online for help, but you'd research into the
No.
problem
No.
to discover that the only saving grace is to just format your computer.
Sure.
Do you
Sure.
remember
Yeah.
that? That
Oh,
was
for
like a
sure,
known
dude.
issue.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
'cause
You get
I
the
never
error
had
tilde at
thought,
tilde. Yeah, yeah.
never would have thought that I should have read like into like known issues before installing just another IDE on the platform.
I know. Yep.
Like that's how far we've come. That you can side by side install like VB6 and or
Yep.
sorry, not VB6. You can side by side install Visual Studio like 2016, and if there is one, I don't remember the numbers, but you know what I mean. You install 2017 and 2019 side by side and preview side by side, and they'll all work. And back in the day, you'd literally have to reformat the machine. There was no way to get it back into a happy state.
Yeah, you know what? Going down this memory lane, we're just getting trashed in the comments now, which is great. Yeah, I think that is not an uncommon experience that you'd have to pave your machine. This was before virtual machines. This was before, uh, side by side, all these great things that the kids love these days. So, yeah,
John, how were those punch cards?
they were great. They're awesome. Except if you tripped over something, they were great.
Those the hanging chads
Yeah, yeah.
would
I just
always
have that
trick
look.
you.
I just have that look of like Clint Eastwood, like sort of scowl, when I think of these things.
Little bit before my time.
So this is a list of awesome .NET Core applications. Awesome lists are basically it's sort of a kind of like a technical meme. It basically is a collection style
Mm-hmm.
repo, and there's awesome lists for everything. There's awesome lists for CMSs. There's awesome lists for whatever IDEs. Who knows? This is an awesome list for .NET Core open source applications. And so, if you're looking for examples, if say you're having a conversation with your boss, and your boss is like, why do we go? Why are you wanting to go to .NET Core? I need examples that show me that it's successful. Well, you can show that person a list like this, and so this is a list of .NET Core applications that have been written. They're available today and allow you to see how they were built.
Nice. Looks like I've got some work to do. I need to post some things
Sure.
to a list. This list or a list like it. I've got the Blazing Coffee warehouse that I've been working on, which is like the all things. Eventually, will be best practices example for Blazor, but right now it's a little bit of a hodgepodge of learning environments for me. But
There you go.
it's got things like localization that I'm working on, and like full stack Blazor with C Sharp, any framework backend, all those things. So it's coming along nicely. It's got the web APIs and the blockchains and the no blockchain. It's getting there though.
Fantastic.
Alrighty, let's see what we got next here, John. .NET performance improvements.
Yeah,
This
so
is
Stephen
something we could
Taub's,
always use.
yeah, Stephen Taub's great. He makes you feel really bad about the code you've written because he's showing you examples of how you can make it perform better. So Stephen works a lot on performance at Microsoft, and he wrote this monster post citing all the performance improvements that are coming in .NET 5. This is a huge post. You may notice the scroll bar is pretty small on your browser there.
Oh
Um,
wow,
yeah, he goes through
didn't
basically
realize that.
he goes through basically everything. So benchmark.net is the sort of utility built into the .NET Core or .NET CLI, and you can run these on your local machine. And what he has done here is cite not only the fixes that have come in .NET 5, but also the results of those fixes. And he does it from everything from the GC to the runtime to the intrinsics to the languages to all kinds of capabilities, and provides source examples, and then most importantly provides the results of those runs. And so you can see there's micro sort of optimizations that have occurred for various things like, you know, integer sorting and double sorting, that sort of thing. These
Wow.
do have meaningful impacts on the runtime performance of your code. So if
Yeah,
you
look at that.
consider, yeah. So if you consider like, oh, it's only 10 nanoseconds, who cares? Actually, if you're doing that loop a million times, it does add up. And you're doing that, then that's being called a million times. It does add up. So, and he also provides a whole list of examples of code that will be more performant when running, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't bore you with going through all the examples, but this is a great post to look at for all that stuff.
Yeah, and these aren't insignificant either. I mean, this is like doubling the speed of a sort. And it doesn't say what size. Well, I mean, it probably does say, but I mean, I didn't read into it to see what the size of that sort is. But the larger the sort, the more improvement you're going to see. So yeah, I mean, this is a
Yeah, it's
huge
huge.
article.
It's huge.
This
Yeah.
took some time.
Yeah, if you scroll down, it starts at the bottom with GC and then
Regular
works its way up.
expressions.
Yeah, into all sorts of like JSON processing, text processing, network
What?
improvements, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Look at the look at the
Millisecond
difference on
improvements. Yep.
this.
Yeah, regex. Regex is always going to be a problem. Regex
Yeah,
is
but
hard.
look at what they chopped out of that. Like I said, man, those sleep statements are pretty tricky.
Yeah, no
I mean,
ops,
no,
no ops. Yeah.
they're knocking out some crazy stuff here.
Yeah,
Like,
so I'm really excited about .NET 5. I think that it's going to provide really, it's sort of like the third version. Every time there's a third version of something shipping or some multiple of three, so version 6 or version 9, it always seems to be a really killer version. And .NET 5, I believe, is a multiple of three, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see. We'll see.
I mean, if you look at something like this, where you're taking the sum, and you've got in .NET Framework, it's taken 330 microseconds. I mean, that's very fast already,
Yes,
but
that's
still,
insane. Yeah.
on .NET 5, it's 18 microseconds.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, it's just astronomically faster. You're gonna see all of these things cumulatively add up to some serious performance when you're looking at something like Blazor running in WebAssembly, because these things are, we're running .NET Core 3.1 right now, so it's still twice as fast as that,
Hmm.
and things running in WebAssembly are pretty significantly slower than here
Sure.
on the desktop.
Sure.
So this is going to be a big boost for something like WebAssembly. So this will be
Yeah,
pretty interesting to see how it impacts a platform where these things are actually noticeable.
my guess, and this is again my curmudgeon hat going back on, is that given the state of apps these days, they're so network bound that
Hmm.
the performance improvements here won't make much of a impact anyway, because people are waiting so long to traverse networks and to send bits across oceans and things like that, that these nanosecond improvements are going to be, they're great. Don't get me wrong. I love improvements, but most apps today are spent like waiting on network calls. And I mean, if you've used any app recently, you know how frustrating it can be. What's this? The dollar sign for what?
Because it is the thing that we are not addressing right now.
Oh,
This
okay.
is money. We are saving money.
Are you talking about Azure now?
Yes.
Yes.
Not only is time money, but CPU cycles in the cloud are money.
Yes. Yes. That is a
And
good point.
if you are having um, an improvement of this, you know, of this magnitude. I mean, you're
Sure.
talking zero point 0.8 or 8 nanoseconds to 125. Um,
So
running in a
Azure
large scale
Functions, for example. Yeah,
application,
Azure Functions, for example.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is money in your pocket that is not being spent on the cloud.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. I'm just such an angry old man that I know that most apps are written with, if network not available, wait for 5 seconds. You're like, ah,
Well, John runs all of his deploys to the CPU under his desk. That's
that's right.
That's his CI/CD pipeline, like
Yeah.
the
So,
the
anyways, go
mysterious
grab a.
white box under your desk.
I know.
It's like the
Go grab.
server for everyone.
I know it's like that old PC we saw. So go grab a coffee. Go check that post out. It's great. Look for maybe the things that you've been frustrated with. Maybe they've been addressed in .NET 5. Who knows?
Absolutely. Projects to complete when learning web development.
Yeah, oftentimes people come into the industry and they're green as hell, and that's not their fault, by the way. It's just the way it is, and they're looking for ways to get their hands dirty. And so oftentimes people will throw it back at them. It's like, read the manual, blah, blah, blah. Or they'll be like, open to submit to an open source project. Those can be daunting, right? Reading a manual is not easy, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And committing to an open source project, like that's even more daunting. It's like walking to the party and say
Mm-hmm.
hi to someone, introduce yourself. And it's like, no, that's daunting too. So what these are little projects that you can task yourself with, dev challenges that allow you to test or sharpen your saw a little bit, so that you can get your hands dirty with doing common scenarios that you find in application development. So devchallenges.io is the site that allows you to work these things out, especially in a web context. I mean, the thing that people don't realize is that you're not going to get good at something until you do it a lot of times, and so
Mm-hmm.
this is one way of doing that.
Yeah, I like stuff like this. This is it's kind of like gamifying the learning
Sure.
of web development.
Yep.
This is one. Steve Smith. Um, he's. Do you know Steve? I think
Yeah.
you probably know Steve,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Used to work at
Steve
Telerik. Yep.
has a lot of these. Let's see. Let's see. He goes by R Dallas.
Yes.
And he's got a stream as well. But he does these katas all the time,
Yes.
and I think he's got them on his GitHub page. But those are the type of things that I like to do as well. So Steve's got, yeah, like kata catalog. Here we go. Um, so this would be like what you showed is very, very beginner, and this is
Yes.
like medium. You're trying to figure out how to be break into that senior level developer space. Completing these on a regular is going to get you there,
Yeah.
because
For
this
those
helps
who
you
don't have a
identify
martial
things.
I was going to say, for those who don't have a martial arts background, a kata is a series of movements. It's sort of like a dance routine that allow you to test out skills for your particular level. So if you're a green belt, for example, in karate, a kata that you'd have at a green belt level would be a series. It's just like a simulated fight, but you're on your own, and allows you to practice the moves that you've been practicing in a simulated fight. Thus, the word kata. That you can, and in this context, it's basically doing the same thing. You're coding up these sort of patterns that you see over and over again.
Yes,
Sorry.
this is a really good list of those things.
Hmm.
And Steve's a good friend of ours and friend of
Yep.
the shows that we do. He's got a almost a Netflix Twitch stream as well,
My,
and he
who
does a lot of
knows? Who
these.
knows? We'll see what happens with Netflix.
Yeah, I was just having a chat with a friend of mine today, a coworker, and I was complaining. I'm not a sports fan at all.
Okay.
Big surprise, probably. Um, so I was complaining. I said, like nerds should have a 15-minute segment that we force upon like the global audience, just like sports are in the news. So there should just be like, like me and you, John, we should have a segment on the local news station for 15 minutes to talk about
Ugh.
AMD versus NVIDIA because people are just as interested in that as I am
Yeah. I
sports ball
guess.
team versus another sports ball
No, you
team.
you, you got to put it in the right context. You're like, yesterday someone checked in some code, and let's go to the highlights. And like, oh, can you believe he wrote this? God, what is he doing? Anyways, back to you. Over to the weather.
But I would rather watch Steve Smith's live stream
Sure.
than any sports ball game ever. So we need to make that happen somehow. Like that needs to be. We need to quit like
Jeff
downplaying.
Fritz. Jeff Fritz does a great. God bless Jeff Fritz. He does a
Yeah.
great job of this with coding it live. Um, I again, I am such an old man. I don't want to watch anyone code anything. I don't want to watch myself code, to be honest. So, but I like tasks like this. Like, let me do this on my own time. Just tell me what I need to do. show me screenshots or GIFs, whatever. Let me code it up myself, and then give me points along the way, like branches. Like you should be here for this step, you should be here for that step. Give me branches that I can learn from. Or better yet, give me an environment where I can do all this stuff without having to install anything. Those are great. They're kind of like labs, I guess. So
I guess in the U.S. news cycles, I've kind of hit a wall of like anti-science people,
okay,
and it's like, how did we end up with a segment for sports on TV, and they're not like today in science,
yeah,
like
yeah.
like it's a rare occasion that we see, like it has to be something just completely epic, like SpaceX or something before it breaks the news cycle,
Or
and
or
like
something completely ridiculous, like, oh, scientists have discovered that dogs actually talk. What you don't
yeah.
know could surprise you more after this.
Yeah, like, but the local like sports ball thing, like, not even like double A. I mean, we're talking like high school sports as a part of our like TV agenda. It's like, really? It's like
Well,
Bobby
if coding
Joe threw a
if
pass
coding
for the whatever today.
if coding was as accurate as they portray on the movies, where you've got the swordfish sort of scene where the guy's like trying to code, he's got a gun to his temple, sort of thing. Got to make it work. Got to make it work. Then yeah, for sure you'd have sporting highlights like that. But coding is like constantly searching up on Stack Overflow and then walking away and then doing laundry and then coming back and looking at thinking about your code in the shower. It's like, what did I do wrong? Why doesn't this work? And then coming and then having a eureka moment. It's kind of like watching someone drive a diesel engine with gas in the tank. Just like you're just ratcheting like this, sort of thing. That's kind of like what coding's like. You get these little fits of like forward momentum, and then the engine just suddenly comes to a halt. At least that's been my experience. I don't know about you, but yeah,
I get all amped up on coffee, and
yep.
I work on like 9 different projects at once, and eventually I'll circle back to one and have some success. That's my
There you go.
pattern right there.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. It's probably just a current climate situation with me. I'm just getting fed
Mm.
up with it. So it's
All right.
like we need more intelligence in science and things, and
Okay.
somehow those things never make it on TV. We do the same thing. Like there's a lot of statues and things being taken down right now here in the
Okay.
U.S. And
Okay.
another thing is like we have like no statue type of things celebrating like scientists and stuff. Like
Oh,
you
come
go in
on.
other parts of the world
Come
and there's
on.
like
That's not true.
statues dedicated like mathematicians and scientists and things. In the U.S. is like, nope. With this fur
Oh,
trapper from a million
I,
years ago, though,
I,
he
come.
got a statue.
I think you're short selling yourself. Come on. There's lots of places where U.S. have great minds and have honored
Oh,
those
just don't
individuals.
celebrate
So,
it.
oh, come on. Science
Yeah.
museums, they're everywhere. They're great. Love them.
All right. I'm on an old man rant today. It's well intentioned though.
Just
And
rename this thing to Two Old Men. There you go.
my
Yep.
ventinghour.com.
There you go.
All right, John. We should call it quits before I say something that I shouldn't
All right.
and make people angry.
All
See,
right.
I have a desktop of a moon. Like that's sciencey enough. It's
That's
not
fine.
sports ball, but it's worth something.
I think technically, that is showing the proper side, isn't it? I think it's tilted by the looks of it.
It's a
Sorry,
proper
I'm just
side.
yeah, because well, it's in you understand that the moon is in geosynchronous orbit, meaning well, its face is always the same towards you and Earth because it's spinning at the same rate. In which sorry, it's nerding out, but
This is
you can't.
the Earth-facing side. It was taken from an
Yeah,
array of Earth-based satellites, or
sorry, I was just
no,
looking at this. I'm
satellite
like,
stations.
I don't recognize that side of it, and so that must be the far side, basically, of the moon. So there you
It's
go.
the This is the Earth-facing side.
Isn't it? It looks like it's tilted though. Anyways, all
This
right.
was
Sorry.
like this was taken by it's like super high res. I don't have a
Yep,
link to it anymore.
that's okay.
I mean, it's like gigantic resolution. It's insanely like detailed. And what they did is they stitched together like many images from high definition cameras based on the Earth. They all pointed at the moon at the same time, took a
Oh, okay,
photo, and then
cool.
they stitched it all together digitally. It's
Okay,
amazing detail, but
wicked,
this is like desktop size version of it.
perfect.
But you can get it like printed, like high quality prints and stuff made out of it. Um, I think it was like an open source, for lack of a better term, type of approach. Like,
Love it.
It's in the public domain, but I grabbed it as a desktop wallpaper. But
Perfect.
we'll leave you with that. Afternoon.
Awesome.
We'll catch you again next week. We'll I'll try to be more uplifting next week.
You're
Maybe
fine.
we'll have a good news cycle for once in our lives here in the States. It's just been dreadful this Monday. Oh my gosh. So come to us for tech news, and we'll try not to hang on the other stuff. So thanks, John. Thanks for bringing
Yep.
the links this week. Appreciate it.
No
Chat
worries.
room. Thanks for the input and conversation. And we'll catch you next Monday. Bye bye.